and we are live on Facebook and YouTube, and my 30-second countdown was not doing what I thought it was supposed to be doing. Um, and that's why I'm the Lunatic Libertarian, and we are live here with my main man, David Wiley, who is running for Wisconsin State, or not Wisconsin, Washington State Legislature. And I apologize because the W's get confused. So it's Washington State Legislature, and David Wiley, I appreciate you coming on my show, the Lunatic Libertarian. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
A little intoxicated, a little frustrated. I mean, I've had a real rough day at work. I just got out of a campaign committee meeting, and life is very, very stressed right now because time is of the essence when we're talking about the 2022 campaigns that need to be brought out there, and the vote that needs to be brought out there when it comes to changing things for people for the positive when it comes to freedom and liberty in the United States. And I hope you're doing that in Washington, and why don't you let everybody know what you're doing in Washington?
Thank you very much. I am running for the second time for Washington State Representative of the city of Everett, original home of Boeing, just north of Seattle here. As I said, this is my second time running. I ran 2 years ago for the position against a more than 10-year incumbent. And it was just a paper candidacy, just trying to spread awareness of liberty issues, get the message out there. And to my surprise, over 20,000 people voted for me, about a third of the voters, in a year when everybody was coming out to vote for Biden and Trump.
That's excellent. And I bet that surprised the hell out of your ass.
It did. You know, I had no volunteers. I had less than $500 budget. You know, I just went around and talked to some people during the Black Lives Matter protests and stuff. You know, I didn't do much at all, and I got a lot of support. And this is a heavily blue district, so, you know, 33% may not sound like something winning, but that's much better than Republicans usually do around here. So it's not just Republicans who are voting that way. We have a good libertarian base in the city, Republicans and crossover Democrats. So seeing that I had support from, you know, those three different opposing views, like, well, I need to make a serious run at it again, right? And to my surprise, my previous opponent, who had been in office for 18 years, just retired.
Excellent. That creates a lot of opportunity for libertarians that are trying to even get on the ballot. But then also, when you already have the support of 20,000 voters that is on record, you have an opportunity here to really set an example of what liberty can do for your constituents.
Yeah. So it's a different race this time. It's not just me or the other guy. It's going to be me versus a variety of people. And Washington State here, we have a top two runoff primary. So in August, it'll be everyone. And then the two who get the most votes move on to the general election ballot in November. And we already know that one of those will be the Democrat, and then it'll be me taking that message to the Democrat.
I appreciate the confidence because, I mean, I haven't seen many candidates that actually have voting confidence, and they're trying to influence people, but you already have that baseline already there from a couple of years ago.
Yep. Yeah, no, over 20,000 people have already checked that ballot for an L next to the name, right? So they've already voted for me. And, you know, the thing is, when a Democrat or Republican runs, they've got this baseline. People are going to vote for them because they have that letter next to their name. And then there's a large number of people who will never vote for them because they have that letter next to their name. And for a libertarian, we have a lower floor, but we have a much higher ceiling. That's something people need to realize. Like, we can go much further. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about this in my campaign because, you know, for instance, no matter how much I fundraise, Democrats and Republicans with all their sponsors are going to fundraise more. But who's really open to their message? They're going to spend a lot of money convincing just a few people who are tired of Democrats and Republicans, if they can. And the thing is, people are ready for the libertarian message. They're ready for a change to the status quo.
Absolutely.
So, I expect to be outspent 100 to 1 no matter what I raise. But the money I raise is actually going to reach people, and it already is. All right, I'm out there doorbelling, sticking literature in people's hands, saying, this is what a libertarian stands for. Now, some people know a little bit. Some people go, oh, yeah, I know libertarians. Gary Johnson ran. What's that mean at a local level, right? And so now they're not just seeing those big presidential issues. They're seeing, the local politics. And local politics is really what matters most. That's what we need to talk to people about. Because the real politics isn't even so much foreign policy in the Fed, things we like to talk about over and over as libertarians. The real politics is the kitchen table, right? The real politics is the money that they're losing because of inflation. People telling me, I have this much paycheck and I went to the grocery store and I almost cried because I can't get what I used to, right?
Well, and when you have
that kitchen table politics.
Well, and when you have the Biden administration actually delivering funds to another country for their proxy war, in the form of hundreds of millions first, and then it's tens of billions next, and people can't put food on their tables, it's absolutely a slap in the face of citizens of this country or people that even live in this country who don't have their citizenship. The thing is that if you live in this country and you participate in its economics, you should actually be able to have a tangible asset at your dinner table every single night if you're working in this country. And one of the things that people don't understand is that they're sending our money from our paychecks to another country. And they do this admittedly and it's open, but it's to save the world.
I take a different approach to that. I don't want to get into foreign policy too much because it's not relevant to my race.
Right.
But this year alone, the federal government has a $6 trillion budget. $6 trillion. 40 billion that we're talking about, that's a rounding error, basically. Mm-hmm. They are wasting money hand over fist, and they only have the receipt for about 4 trillion. So they're printing 2 trillion because nobody's buying the debt anymore. All the countries around the world have too many problems. So we're just printing money, this massive inflation that we're going through right now. And, the fact that we're printing it means it's going to get a lot worse because we're not feeling the effects of that 2 trillion in printing right now. We're feeling the effects of the 1 trillion they printed last year.
Right. And where does Washington rank as a state as far as how much federal dollars it gets as far as other states?
Oh, I don't know that answer, but again, as I said, we're the home of Boeing, so I guarantee you it's a lot. Boeing is one of the main beneficiaries of the XM Bank and, other things. So, yeah, we get a lot. And at the local level, the importance of talking about that, these federal dollars come in and they're not without strings attached. It's not just a waste of the taxpayer money at the federal level. When you're looking at what they're doing with those federal dollars, they're bribing state governments to do things that aren't really in the people's interests.
Correct.
As I always remind the people, good ideas don't require force. If it's a good idea, would we really need a bribe to do it?
A lot of COVID dollars have a lot of strings attached to it too, and people don't realize that.
Yeah. And that's money, in order for the U.S. government to give a state $1 billion, they have to tax $1.5 billion. Correct. That's money already taken out of the economy, taking out of households to give it back with the puppet strings attached, with the leash on it.
You are correct.
Was economist Thomas Sowell who said that government is the art of taking money from people quietly and giving some of it back to them extravagantly.
Which is a ridiculous concept if you look at it in its wholehearted fact of what it is. It is an absolute ridiculous concept. It's You're actually stealing money from people and then saying, well, I'm going to give you a fragment of it back and be like, oh, well, you should be appreciative.
But unfortunately, the Democrats and Republicans have most of people brainwashed into believing there's no other way of doing it. What's the other system? And that's what people like me have to really get out there, and we have to have really fleshed out ideas to show them, hey, I can bring this proposal. I can do this. I can support this thing that, you're going to like. As one libertarian in the state legislature, like Marshall Burt in Wyoming, I'm not going to tip the scales of the balance in the House, right, but I'm going to be able to put bills in there and make them vote for it. Republicans who say, oh, we don't want to raise taxes, but we have to compromise. Like, okay, well, let me put this bill out here because you're not even trying, and let's see the votes. Democrats who say they want to clean things up, they want to end qualified immunity, but they never introduce the bill, right?
Right.
So I'm going to
introduce. It never reaches the floor. It's presented to. I've seen a lot of many bills, whether it be on the local level, the state level, or it's on the federal level, that are presented into the public, but then it actually never reaches the floor for a vote because the powers that be want to tease you for the next election, and then say, well, we did this for you. And this is that manipulation that people need to get away from as far as government to make you dependent on the state. And I think that's one of the things that you're presenting here right now.
Yeah, exactly. And different libertarians have their different philosophies to the state. Mine personally, I want this. I'm not an anarchist. I just want things to be voluntary. I want the government to respect our consent, end confiscatory taxation, right? Anything that we value from the government, we will pay for willingly.
I would agree.
To take it by force, right? I know a couple years ago, I had a discussion with someone from our state parks department because they were worried about what a libertarian would do. And I told them, actually, I think I could increase funding to state parks because it's something people want and they will pay for voluntarily. And all that funding should go back into your department, right? It shouldn't go into these other funds and pay for these other things that people don't want, right? If we had a choice, lots of people, including libertarians, would say, yes, I want to pay for national defense. I want to live in a free country and not be invaded by some foreign dictator. I will pay for that voluntarily. But I don't want to pay for bombing brown kids in the Middle East, right? Correct. That's the problem. We don't right now get a choice. Once you have that choice, certain programs that people like will take off. They will improve. And the ones that don't will fail. In economics, it's called creative destruction, right? You have a whole bunch of different companies. They have a different approach. And the ones that have a bad idea or can't manage themselves, they get destroyed. They fall out. So success prospers.
What do you think about fraud, waste, and abuse as far as current programs and what the accountability is currently represented in government versus what real accountability is?
There's almost no accountability right now in government.
Oh, come on. The Government Accountability Board said what happened to all the money.
Yeah, those are, if we want to name them accurately, they're government whitewashing boards is what they are, right? So they're there to give people who misbehave a slap on the wrist. I'm one of those people who actually pays attention, who reads reports from the state auditor, who finds corruption, reports all these things, and then it just gets filed away and nothing happens.
Correct. Right? There is no accountability for any fraud, waste, and abuse in government right now.
Yeah. People don't get fired. You have the most atrocious abuses. Using a local example, prosecutors were paying bribes to attorneys for children to take them away from their parents and put them in foster care in order to get more federal funding. Saying, well, there's all that federal funding. Well, if they can increase the number of kids in foster care, whether it's good for them or not, they can get more federal funding. So they always want to increase it.
Now that you brought that up, I
those prosecutors, no charges.
Right. And this is the problem with business and government. being involved with each other, is that when you're trying to create revenue from the people and you have to try and create numbers statistically to fit that revenue, it's kind of a ridiculous thing because you're trying to increase your income for your purposes, but you're going to desecrate humanity for those purposes just so that you can incur more funds. And that is the corruption in government that truly actually makes me angry.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's this, you keep on voting for the lesser of two evils, but not just that. Even those inside government, like, oh, well, they believe they're doing a good thing. I'm keeping this program running that helps kids. And, I have to grind up a few kids to keep the system running. But, they all believe that the ends justify the means, but it doesn't. They're destroying lives in this process.
A human being. It's not just a life. It's a human being that they're not actually asking for your help. They want their mother, their father, whatever, no matter what condition they're in. And the thing is that the state does not need to regulate human behavior. And that's one of the things that people really don't understand is that human behavior is human behavior. It's not going to change no matter how you try and quote unquote make laws or regulate it. And the government has no business being there to begin with.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and a lot of the problems we're facing, the real origin of it is government. One of my key issues is housing. So in the Puget Sound area, we have a massive housing shortage. We're currently short about 50,000 housing units that are needed right now, right? And this has a bunch of adverse effects, increasing homelessness, increasing rents, more poverty. But why do we have a shortage? Is it because developers don't want to build homes and house people? No, they make money for doing that.
Right. It's a no-brainer.
It's in their benefit to make more. It's government that's stopping them. And the irony to me is that in cities like I live in Everett and in Seattle, they're building tiny homes at taxpayer expense. They're taking a whole bunch of money, again, hurting poor people, to put some people in these little homes, and private developers are not allowed to build these. We have square footage minimums. We have parking minimums. We have all these many laws at county and local level that says, oh, you can't build this help without taxes that we're going to steal money from for people in order to build for them.
Correct. Because it's a policy that implements another policy that implements another policy that implements another policy. And it's all stacked against the American citizen or any individual that is living in this country. That is what it is all about. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, is that there is not a problem of actually getting things done. It's the bureaucracy and the barricades that are involved when actually you want to create something that's better for humanity. You can't do this without a license. You can't do this without a permit. You can't do this without certification and yada, yada, yada. You need the proper paperwork. Let me see your paperwork. It's just like a person, if you go to jail and let's say your criminal charges are not of a great stature, let's say. But if you go to prison and you get confronted as an individual, they're going to say, let me see your paperwork of who you are as far as your charges. And that may end up with multiple different situations that happen after the fact. The thing is that the government is the same way. It's absolutely ridiculous, the barricades that are placed upon individuals that are constitutionally given the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this is one thing that I preach about all the time. I'm sorry, I'm preaching. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is a constitutional law of the land. And people have forgotten this because they become dependent on the state because maybe their individual self was taught something that shouldn't have really been taught, because we have generational thought processes. And I think that's why we're in the situation that we are now, that people are taught that, well, if you do this and this and this, the state will take care of you. And this is a generational thing. But I'm going off on a rant. we're going to stick with David Wiley and why we maybe gotten into this situation. Now, let's talk about where you're from. Let's talk about that sanctuary city that you had during Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
Let's talk about that because it's a sovereign state according to there is no outside police, there's no government going in there. It's a barricaded sovereign state, let's say. What was going on there?
Oh, there was Black Lives Matter protests, and there was a bunch of protests going on. And they decided, basically the police vacated one of their buildings. All the police left, and they decided, oh, we're going to protest this. We're going to take over the police building and not let them come back in. To which me as a libertarian is like, well, aren't they community police? Don't they kind of need the consent of the people to be policing there? So, sure, okay, whatever. It may or may not be a good idea, but we should be respecting the consent of our communities. They went in, they occupied it, they set up a perimeter. There were a lot of issues with this going on because they didn't have the consent of all the businesses going on there. There was a lot of conflict. They ended up having their own kind of private security force, which did work. And then police being unwelcome basically pulled back from it. And the inevitable happened, which is outside the limits of this Chaz shop, there were some murders and crimes because there was a zone in between where nobody was looking out. So that became the true anything goes area, and someone got murdered, and it became the state's justification to go in with force, and
right,
in the way they usually do. Which, of course, the problem is these people were mostly anarcho-communists. I, of course, don't agree with them and their choices. But the problem is that we've used force to stop them. So they don't believe they were wrong. They don't believe they failed. They just believe that they were stopped. Whereas if we had let them do it and let them fail on their own, they would see that their philosophy was itself a failure. And that's one of the problems. We need to stop using force and stop bailing out failures with, the money from the productive people.
Well, and as a master diesel technician that thinks he does things for his community as far as producing a product that makes it safe for everybody to make sure that products get to their destinations from their crop. I live in a farming community, so if I can get the crops to
Can I correct
consumer,
you on one thing? You said you think. That's absolutely wrong. You do provide value because if you didn't, you work with a voluntary business. If you didn't, you would be out of business.
Well, and I work for a very small company. There's only 3 mechanics on the floor, the owner, and a service writer. That is the company. So I think that what I provide is trying to be the very best, but it comes at a cost. Now, when we talk about what people think things should cost in an economic sense, I'm a person that wants to provide something for somebody in return for goods and services. So my goods and services, I don't need tangible fiat dollars to buy my stuff at a grocery store. I'm talking to farmers. What are you growing on your land? You got some onions? Do you got some tomatoes? Do you got cucumbers? Do you got because that's what I know is going to make myself survive, and I can do whatever I want with that product, regardless if it's labeled organic or anything like that. And I don't like labels, titles, and categories to begin with. That's another thing that I preach on this show is that that's what's got humanity all really kind of messed up in the head because, well, I'm more superior morally because I'm this, or I am more superior genetically because I am this, or whatever the hell they want to label themselves as. I'm a human being. I like other human beings. Some of the other human beings, maybe I don't like them so much, but I'm not going to interact with them voluntarily, so they can do whatever they want in their own neck of the woods, just as long as they're not bothering me. These are the concepts that people really don't understand because it's too overgeneralized, in my opinion. How would you deliver that message even more into effect to people that think they're more special just because how high they identify?
That's difficult.
I like human being. That's how I identify, regardless of what my nationality is, or my veteran status, or what color of my skin, or any of that other, or what religion I practice. I'm a human being. I like other human beings.
Yeah, no, and I'm there as well. I believe that, all humans have inalienable human rights. It's what this country was founded on. As someone who's traveled the world a lot, leaving the country really made me appreciate it more. That we're not a nation for one people. You have
Correct.
Europe, you have Germany for the Germans, you have England for the English, France for the French. The USA is really unique around the world because it was founded on an idea that all human beings have individual rights. Now, we've got a flawed track record on delivering on that promise at best.
Correct. I agree with that, and I say it was
We still have the
correct in
idea.
philosophy, but not maybe in practice.
Yeah. We've never really gotten there. And unfortunately, at this point, we're headed away from it way too fast.
And I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm sure you don't like it either.
And it's devastating. Unfortunately, we have kind of a generation that's raised in the public school system, that's been taught all this socialism, all these wonders of government, because it needs to. In order to self-perpetuate, it needs people to believe in it, despite all its failures, and that all its failures are simply because there's not enough of it. So we pour more in, it fails more, which means we need even more. And people have been afraid. But I think the difference is now is that the last 2 years, people have had some of that curtain pulled back, and they see the wizard working after the lockdown, going, wait, government isn't working.
Correct.
We don't understand.
It's not the facade that they told us, because our security blanket isn't there. It's a security blanket that really isn't there.
Yeah. No, it really was the curtain in front of the Wizard of Oz. We're looking at the big projected image and not realizing that it's just some guy pulling some levers over there to distract us from what's really going on.
And I think people are buying into that security blanket a little too much, and they're trying to reinforce it, even though the layers are being peeled back every single day in front of their eyes. And they've grasped onto this concept for so long that they can't actually realize that it's really a facade.
Yeah. I don't, something that I use that I find useful, the Libertarian Statement of Principles says that we challenge the cult of the omnipotent state. And some people think that language is a little bit out there, but I think it's very accurate. And I don't want to get sidetracked on the religious side, but it really is a cult. It really is a god for so many people on the left and the right. And it's funny, no offense towards atheists, and I have a lot of libertarian atheist friends who absolutely agree with me, but the approach that people take is absolutely God. It's amazing that, you can have a socialist atheist say, oh, it's fictional, it's not real. Well, what is government? It's just a concept. Nothing physical there. That's a building. In fact, it's modeled after a Greek temple, if that wasn't a big enough of a hint to you.
Right. It boggles my mind that it's another human being in a uniform that presents an idea that they have power over me.
Yeah.
And when somebody actually addresses that entity or that human being in that uniform, or I call it a costume now because I've way gone beyond what another human being has the rights over me, is that they're in a costume portraying a role to say that they have power over me. Now, who is that individual? It's a human being in front of me. Now, we can address this as human beings, or we can address it under policy enforcement or whatever the circumstances are. It's a role that somebody's playing to enforce something upon you. And I think that's one thing that people really need to grasp upon themselves, is that it's a concept that keeps you under a guidance of control.
Yep, exactly. We as libertarians, we often pick on cops, sometimes unjustly, because they
Cops,
protect the peace,
military,
also
whatever,
enforce the
attorney, judge.
Point being that recently in Uvalde, Uvalde, Texas, sorry, we had an example there because, putting on the uniform of the government does not change who you are inside, does not change morality. And we had cops who stood outside letting children die and keeping parents from rescuing them. We had another cop who grabbed someone's shotgun, not his, not a service weapon from the government, a private citizen's arm, and rushed in there to stop the shooter and save children's lives. It wasn't the uniform that made the difference that day. It was the person inside.
Correct.
Right? And that's what we need to pay attention to. When I'm asked about, reform with police, that's often, what I say is morality doesn't change. Right? It doesn't matter whether you're wearing a government uniform or not. It doesn't matter whether it's individual or done by the government. Morality is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And the person inside who's acting for the government, they aren't changed. They don't become a better person because they have a seal of office. For better or worse, when you vote for me, you get David Wiley. Right?
I ran into a lot of police officers in my personal interactions. I was pulled over. I was a passenger in a vehicle. I had a marijuana contained entity in my pocket. And, I had my student ID and all this and that. And the cop was and I was a grown man with, MATC ID because I was at a technical college for welding. But they pulled me over. It wasn't my vehicle. They pulled us over. I had it on me, and he was like, "Oh, what's this?" I was like, "Man, it is what it is." And it wasn't nothing but a little bit of a half of a joint, really. And he just stuck it in his back pocket. And he was like, "Y'all can go." The entity of the police officer as a human being is one thing. The entity of a policy officer is another thing, because the entity of the human being can always choose what they want to enforce at the time of enforcement, no matter what the situation is. It's all whether they want to do the paperwork. Now, we have go-getters, gung-hoers, people that want to rank up high and be influencers and all this and that. And I think that's where humanity has been separate from the state. And when we talk about police officers, they're good people. They have a job to do as far as trying to keep people safe in dangerous environments. And the United States is a dangerous environment. So,
unfortunately, our courts have said they don't have the responsibility of protecting people.
I know that.
But a lot of people become police officers because they think
that's the concept.
That's what they want to do. Yep.
That's the mindset. That is what they think they are doing, but that's not the law. What they think they're doing is not the law.
The problem we as libertarians need to remember is it's not humanity. We're not trying to fix humanity. Humanity is what it is. It's always been flawed, right? It's the system. It's the process. And the government process right now rewards a certain output. It wants to enforce its rule. And so that's what the system does. You don't have to save lives. You need to enforce our codes. So there's incentives and punishments for police, for people in the system to do that. And that's what I, as a libertarian, really getting elected, I want to change that. I'm going to challenge that. And I'm telling people, look, I'm going to change the law, or try to, so that police officers aren't doing all this code enforcement. I want them keeping the peace. I want them stopping violent crime, right? What do we like to say as libertarians? No victim, no crime.
No crime, right.
Right? And the public isn't really there yet. And they're starting, particularly right here with the growing crime rate. I can still talk to a Republican. They're like, yeah, I don't want people doing drugs. I don't want prostitution. But
well, we can bring that up.
Yeah, but, I talk to them like, but don't you think it's more important that we go after these violent crimes? And we have limited resources. Do you really want the police chasing after those people when there's a murder happening? And they will, because the government knows it can fleece them for money.
Correct. So here's the concept. if we were to, as libertarians, if we were to end the drug war and make it into a solid federal and global trade market, we eliminate the drug war because all trade is now legal, regardless of what the commodity is. Now,
Mhm.
if we were to actually instill the business mindset of quote unquote drug dealers or pimps or whatever they think is a commodity that allows them to survive in society. Now, if we were to change the mindset of these individuals and say that, hey, we eliminated these government barricades that said that you didn't need a license, you didn't need a certificate. All you needed to do was just continue on in the trade of the commodity. Do you think that libertarians would have an upper hand in argument, or am I just a lunatic that thinks that that idea, as far as opening and actually solving one argument with another, is that if you end the drug war, you actually implement foreign policy as far as opening the trade markets? Now, what treaties will be vacated or voided because of this? Now, do we end the global commodity trade of currency with world banks as far as a centralized currency system is concerned, when we can open trade to every country as far as every commodity? Now, how that commodity is still cultivated and everything else is up to debate. But the thing is that many policies have dictated that the competition of natural substances like cannabis or cocaine or heroin or opiate plants, these are natural commodities that are openly traded on the market with pharmaceutical companies because they have the monopoly on the trade. So when we talk about the drug war, it's two drug wars. We have the pharmaceutical trade groups that can openly trade opiates and everything else, and then we have the underground system that cannot openly trade opiates and everything else because
Yep.
it is a commodity that has been restricted from the public because it's a detriment. We got Mexicans and blacks. They're gonna rape white women when we're talking about marijuana, which is just cannabis, but hemp is still imported from Canada to this day as a
Yep.
commodity, but it is restricted in this country, but we still purchase it from another. That this stuff boggles my mind, and I want your opinions. I'm sorry I went on a rant there, but
It's fine. And the thing I want to underscore is we as libertarians, we've always had the best arguments. Like what you said, it makes sense. It's reasonable. The problem is that less than 10% of the populace is ever convinced by any argument, right? This is what we have to realize as libertarians. This is where we fail. We could have the 100% perfect argument and argue it till the cows come home. We won't win with just arguments. The 90% of the people are persuaded emotionally, right? And we have to go out there and win, not their minds, their hearts. We have to convince them that we care about them. It's great. I'm not saying we don't have those ideas. We need them, especially people like me who are running for office. I've got to develop those and say, okay, and then I've got to turn that into a bill. I've got to turn that into a law and fix it. But I need to present it to people, and the only way people are going to accept it is if it makes their life better. If I can take it to the kitchen table and say, I care about you and your family. I care about your neighbors' families. And I want to do this because it'll be better for everyone. And we need to be better about relating. We need to be better at expressing not our minds, but compassion.
because there's a nuance with everybody that wants to take their next step in their next breath.
Yep. And while we are a party that accepts enlightened self-interest, we are a party that accepts people can be selfish. I would argue that we're libertarians because at least at some level, we're not. The really selfish people, they go into government and they control all that power from the top, and they screw everybody else because they don't care about mutual benefit.
It's isolated. We're trying to spread mutual benefit for our own benefit, and I think that's where the message is great.
And some of us are really selfish. Some libertarians believe they're completely selfish, but they're not, because they're not willing to use violence. Every libertarian cares, and we need to embrace that we care and tell people that we care. We need to get a little bit more out of our mind space and more into our heart space, right, when we're communicating with people who aren't libertarians.
Yeah, because I mean, if I can provide to a farmer or to a trucker and say that, hey, if I give you this, can you provide something for me? It's always going to be a mutual trade for mutual benefit. Now, maybe somebody cannot provide mutual benefit, but you have an overabundance of benefit to give to that person because your family and yourself is not going to need it. And that's one thing that people I think are sleeping on libertarians is that we offer anything that we don't need to everybody else.
Yep. Exactly. We believe in charity. We really actually want to help people because, again, as I said, I don't want to tax poor people to provide homes for poorer people. I want to raise everybody up. And I have a tool called the free market that can let me do that. I can have this developer who's in a business. He wants to feed his own family, and he's going to make houses because these people who only have a little bit of money, but he'll make what they can afford if we let them.
Well, just remember because those people are going to want to work to have that housing, and
Yep.
they're going to do this and they're going to do that to actually pay for that housing through their
Yeah.
work. The
Yep.
only thing is that people have a fiat currency shoved so far up in their fucking mindset that they don't understand that it's mutual trade that's happening to make the system work.
Yeah, we just see the dollars, we see the bills, and it becomes
Yes.
magical thinking. What we really teach in our public schools is magical thinking. You flip the switch and the light comes on. You turn the handle and the water pours out. And it's magic. It just happens. But it doesn't. There's a system behind all of it. It all works because of a series of chain and effect and human designed systems. Right?
Yeah.
That green piece of paper has almost no inherent value. You can't burn it for much heat. You can't eat it. It's just a commodity of trade. It could be all sorts of things. It can be gold. It can be cryptocurrency. It can be
Tangible assets or tangible skill sets.
Yep. Yeah. Any commodity of trade, anything that we value. And unfortunately, because we're storing value in fiat currency, we're allowing the government to control it. So that's what they're doing right now is they're devaluing that currency, which they do really own when we get down to it. It's the US dollar. They're destroying it, but we as a people are choosing to put our wealth into it.
Well, the thing is that they don't control this interaction between you and I.
Nope.
And it's a voluntary interaction. And that's one of the examples that I want to present to the people is that you want to come on the show and present your campaign and tell people who you are. To say that this is the libertarian that was voted upon for 20,000 votes in a Washington state campaign. And we're going to do this again. And this is the message behind it. And I was like, I want him on the show because I want to promote my podcast by having the best guest on the show. And this is an individual that is going to promote my show. So I want him on. And to have an individual that actually has the example that should be set upon everybody is that there is a spectrum to libertarianism, no matter if you're on the left or on the right. We're all human beings, and we can all reach a mutual agreement that we want to take our next step and our next breath without violence implemented or my stuff taken. And personal property can be traded upon individuals. That happens every single day, no matter if it's a Facebook Messenger or a Craigslist ads or whatever. People will trade with each other voluntarily as long as everybody has a mutual benefit. And that's one of the things that people don't really understand either. And it kind of boggles my mind because when you can provide for one person and that person provides for two or three, it's a perpetual motion that keeps the system going.
Yeah, exactly. And most of us came from or are part of a two-parent family, right? And often the American ideal is that one is working, one has the money, and well, what's the other one? Are they getting nothing out of it? Are they being taken advantage of? No, not at all. There's an agreement there, some form or another, that okay, this person's getting the outside resources, and this person's investing inside resources, time, labor, so on. And there's an exchange. And for most of us, that exchange is the most valuable one in our lives, right? Is the family.
Yeah.
We are willing
I can agree with that totally.
money into it for our families. Right? That's the human nature.
Well, and for families, I think that you can even take it to a primal nature where it's to the death. If somebody was to go and impose themselves on a family member of yours, let's take a public example of Cain Velasquez, a UFC fighter that's an alpha male. He's a huge individual that had another family member that was supposedly sexually assaulted, and maybe it was true. I don't know. It's just an example, but he imposed himself on that individual after the fact. This is the thing that I don't really don't disagree with, is that if there's one imposition of aggression on one individual, the reaction should be the same, if not more. Now, I'm also a Norse pagan, a different religious background. Um, so the concept still that in mutual agreement we can prosper, but in mutual disagreement we can self-destruct. And that's one thing that people don't really understand, is that that can be a perpetual motion throughout timelines that can go vastly beyond our own existence.
Yep, that's true. Um, I say one example of, you were saying giving up, I would say the Revolutionary War, all the people who fought there and died, they obviously didn't do it for their own benefit. If you're dying on a battlefield, you're not getting a benefit. They wanted to end that monarchist way of life. They wanted to end people as commodities. They wanted us, whether they're biological descendants or, no matter who you are, if you believe in that dream, you're an ideological descendant, right?
Correct.
They wanted that way of life that they didn't fully understand.
Ask any veteran that swore their oath to the Constitution of the United States to defend them, that Constitution against enemies, foreign or domestic. Ask any veteran that, and they understand that that oath is a concept that they go to war to fight, and then they're all jacked up because that oath is in direct contradiction to what they're actually doing in practice.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. But the people of the Revolutionary War, they fought and they sacrificed.
Yeah.
Because it was more value that we would have a chance, this chance that we have now.
The foresight in that is outstanding, because people don't understand that was 200 years ago, and the foresight in that is absolutely critical to how people live today.
Yeah. More people need to read Thomas Paine.
Yes, they do. Mr. Roger Mayhem in Clubhouse introduced me to Thomas Paine as far as the formal thought process. Excuse me. And what I told him is that from what I was instilled as a child all the way up into then, I didn't know the actual source was Thomas Paine, but I knew the influence on my family was Thomas Paine when I started reading him. So it doesn't really matter as long as it's actually transcended through the timelines of people from one generation to the next, that thought is still in people's mind, is the absolute idea that I think people need to grasp upon, is that it's there, that people want freedom. People want no introductions of barricades on their lives. The life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is what it's about.
A lot of people have their own political influences right now. There's big caucus that has Ron Paul as their major backing. But for me, it's Thomas Paine. That's where it's at for me as a libertarian. And his common sense and talking about the natural rights of mankind. You know, they say man in that book, which is a little bit dated terminology. So I say mankind because it includes women.
According to some groups, but I digress.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, this idea that we're all naturally morally equal, right? And that we're all striving, to better ourselves on our own, and that certain individuals place themselves above everyone else. And they're putting a weight down on humanity. They're keeping us down. And that's the government system of having, these rulers. Because the way it was set up, the president wasn't supposed to be a ruler. It's become one through changes.
Well, he wasn't supposed to be a king either.
No. Not a king. And we don't have kings, but they weren't supposed to be a ruler. They're not supposed to be telling us how to live, right?
Correct.
All of Congress wasn't. The federal government existed because of foreign threats, right? They had just gotten done fighting the world's superpower at the time, and they realized that the existence of the nation was a fragile thing. There were 13 colonies that didn't even necessarily get along that well. Mm-hmm. Right? They had a lot of conflicts, big one being slavery that inevitably set up for the deadliest American war. People don't realize that, yes, it was the deadliest. Even in the 19th century, that war claimed more than World War I and World War II in terms of American lives. But yeah, it brought us together. The federal government is just supposed to be there keeping us safe from foreign involvement. To talk about my philosophy, one of the reasons I'm not an anarchist is because same reason I believe in gun rights. Well, everybody else has a gun, so people should be able to have a gun to defend themselves. Why do I want a government? Protect myself from foreign governments.
That's exactly what the purpose of the government is for.
Yeah. One of the slogans that I use in my campaign when talking to people is that government doesn't exist to protect us from ourselves. The purpose of government isn't to tell us how to live. The valid purpose of government is to protect us from each other. That's it.
One thing I talk about people is that when you don't need government, the independence is always going to be on you as far as where are your skill sets, where are your knowledge, where is your independence as far as being a sovereign human being to exist on this planet or this plane of timeline, however you want to explain it. The thing is that when you look at because like I said, I was a Norse pagan. I am a Norse pagan, not was, but I'm a Norse pagan. So wisdom is the highest aspect of which you can obtain throughout your timeline. Through failure, you will find out who you are. Maybe I'm not a carpenter. Maybe I'm a blacksmith. Maybe I'm not a mechanic. Maybe I'm an AC technician. Maybe I'm an architect. Maybe I'm a person that can sell many things. The wisdom through failure is where you will end up throughout your timeline as far as your experience. And then that timeline needs to be accumulated and then placed into the next mind that you just created in your children. That entire timeline needs to be transcended into your children, and then it progresses to the next timeline. So when we talk about skill sets and knowledge and understanding human interaction, and that it's not all about Nike or anything that you've been sold in an advertisement or any of that shit. It's about making sure that you can take your next step, you can take your next breath, and that it's a mutual agreement that we can survive together without conflict.
Yep. Absolutely. And let's, maybe let's talk about conflict, why we want to cooperate, because in conflict, in war, other things, it's destructive, right? One of my professors told me that, in a fight between animals, there isn't necessarily a winner at all. Typically, there's just a survivor.
Correct.
Right? And that's what it is. We do not want conflict. We do not want war. As pretty much any veteran can tell you, there's nothing really to be gained from war. It's just death and destruction.
Well,
Right?
all you know is that you did survive.
Exactly. That's really the best you can get out of it, unfortunately. There's theft and stuff, but I won't go in there. And the fruit of
Well, there's a lot of other things that happen in war, and that's a totally isolated.
It's destructive to human society. There's less for everyone afterwards when we build society based on conflict.
Because there's an also a consolidation of power, and there's less of power for everybody else after there's a conflict of war, and that's one thing that's happened perpetually over the past 100 years, over and over and over again. Is the consolidation of power that just keeps just minimalizing itself, and that's why I'm a minimalist. I think that government, if I want to label myself, I think that government should minimalize itself in my personal life every single day. But if I wanted to grasp on that label.
Yeah. For me, it's a little different. I want government to mostly be irrelevant. But I'm a little bit rare among libertarians in that I don't care what size the government is. I just want it to be voluntary. It's the nature of it. You can have as much or as little government as you want because it's voluntary. You want government to provide you, say, like cable internet. Well, if it can do so efficiently in your rural community where a major corporation, why not? There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's voluntary, as long as we're not stealing from people to do it. Government, when you really get down to it fundamentally, is just another type of human organization. That's how we structure society. Yep. Corporation, tribe, government.
What's the hierarchy, though?
Yes.
That's the question.
What is the hierarchy? What gives someone the authority to give orders if they're giving orders?
Right. And somebody always thinks they need to be giving orders.
Yep.
That's the problem.
Yep.
There's no, if you can have an actual Arthur of the Knights of the Round Table, where there is no one end or the other. It's always a centrifugal thing that is happening with everybody. That was always the concept and that's one of the things about that story that always grasped me. But when I found the Norse pagan faith, it was the oath ring, and it's always a circle of motion. And if you look at the yin and yang, it's always a circle of motion. But you may have two conflicting sides of each other. And if you look at Native American, it's always the circle with the four signs of north, south, east, and west. So this is an ancient thing.
Not always, because I'm part Native American. There's many different Native American nations with their own customs and beliefs. But more to the point is that we need to, what's the moral source? In any organization, in any human structure, what is the moral source for it? I work for a company, a corporation, and the moral source for my boss giving me orders is that it's voluntary. I choose to. There's an agreement, he's going to give me money at the end of the week. I'm going to give him labor. So the moral authority is our voluntary agreement, right? Yeah. I'm honoring my word. He's honoring his word. And, anytime we're free and we can stop. With government, it should be similar. It should be, I choose to be here and a part of this government. They're going to give me, collective protection from those outside who want to destroy life and liberty. And I'm going to give them what I think voluntarily is worth that by buying the service, right? An example I give to some of my constituents when they talk about necessary government services is that, are they really necessary, right? Some people say, a lot of socialists say, government has to provide you the necessary things. But there's an easy example. We all need food to live, and the government doesn't provide it to us.
They tell
And
you that they're providing it because they're outsourcing they're telling the farmers how much to grow and controlling the commodity at the source, but then they're also controlling the price, saying of who profits and who does this, and you
but
know.
they're not delivering food to my home. They're not choosing what I eat, and nobody wants them to. They recognize that would be a disaster. Like, you want the government choosing what your meal is and how much of it? No, nobody wants that. So why do you want them choosing your health care? Right?
But think of the people that have bought into like the WIC program or food stamps or any of that stuff too. You know, the government designates what you can purchase on one platform or another. I mean, I think that it's a progressive grooming of the thought process. But we may need to continue this. We're reaching on an hour here. I love how this conversation has been going. I think we can go probably for another half hour, 45 minutes, maybe even 2, 3 hours, depending on what topics we touch on. Um, David Wiley, why don't you let everybody know your website, where they can contact you, and where you're running in Washington? And they already know your thought process here. Just let them know where they can get in touch with you.
Yep. I'm running in Western Washington, just north of Seattle, the 38th Legislative District, Everett, home of Boeing, also Marysville, the Tulalip Reservation. I have 2 websites. You can see wileyforwashington.com, which is my voter messaging site, bringing the message of liberty to people. That's Wiley, Wiley. And I have wileyforliberty.com. That's for those who want to get involved and donate, want to volunteer, who want to contribute and be the force behind getting a libertarian elected to the Washington State Legislature. And, if you will make a donation in the name of the Lunatic Libertarian, then maybe we can get back on this podcast and we can make more things happen.
Oh, well, I'll definitely be donating to that. I'll tell you that because I definitely want you back on here. I got a bunch of guests that have been contacting me and saying, "Hey, let me back on the podcast and let's keep spreading the word of liberty." I'm willing to bring anybody on here. I love everybody that is about being about freedom and minimizing the government barricades that implement all this pressure on our life. If we can move freely, I think we can learn freely, and I think that we can interact freely. And I think that human interaction is always voluntarily, no matter if it's in trade and fiat currency or if it's in skills and resources. So I think that people need to get out here and vote for David. They need to get out here and get on that liberty bandwagon out in Washington State, get him into legislation, and just get the government out of your way. Just get them out of the way. If you get
Yep.
government out your way, just think mental health improves, livelihood improves, your family life improves. Maybe I don't want to work a 9 to 5. One thing that COVID did is that it implemented a home lifestyle that can actually be sustained with still creating a commodity for consumers.
Yep.
Now, I'm not a consumer. I hate that title. I hate that label. I'm not a consumer. I don't just consume shit. I'm a producer. So it goes both ways. So the government labels everybody in this country as a consumer, not a producer. Remember that the statistics can be skewed in favors of one or the other. There's a spectrum of libertarianism. There's a spectrum to liberty. Everybody enjoy your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I'm the Lunatic Libertarian, David Wiley. I really appreciate you being on the show. We got to do it again. You need to stay with me after I end this broadcast because I got a couple more questions for you to set up another one. Everybody get out there, vote for this man. Washington State Legislature, get out there. I'm the Lunatic Libertarian, David Wiley. We are out.